Great song. Take your Bibles and please turn to Revelation chapter number 22. We're not going to get there for some time, okay? Not going to get there for some time, but just keep your finger right there in Revelation chapter number 22. We're in the midst of a series entitled The Immutable Characteristics of God, and we talked a couple weeks ago when we started the series of what the word immutable means. And basically it means changeless. God does not change. And because God does not change, we have security. We have stability. He is always who He said He would be, and He will be that till the end of time. Our God does not change. Last week, we talked about what I called God's allness. So we first talked about God's unchangeableness, right? Now, last week we talked about God's allness. And when we mean allness, we mean His omniscience, His omnipresence, His omnipotence, this idea that God knows all things, that God is everywhere, and that God has all power. And if God is this concept, this concept of if God's allness, this means that He is all we'll ever need. So He's the first one we should turn to, shouldn't we? That He is the answer when we don't know what to do. He is the answer of we don't know where to go. Well, talk to God. He's the answer when we have no more power left to give. God is the answer for everything we need. Today, we're going to talk about what's called God's eternality, God's immortality, God's endlessness. How many of you are lost already? I'm going to raise both my hands, and I'm the one who wrote this message. When we talk about God's timelessness, what do I mean? What do I mean when I say God's timelessness? To say that God is eternal or timeless, we mean that He is without beginning or end. Time itself has no real meaning to God as it does to us, because God existed before time was even a thing. Honestly, I was talking with Lee. Lee comes in and talk in my office every once in a while and says, "Pastor, I just need to let you know how we're doing. Here's the music." And at the end of it, I stopped him and I said, "Lee, you got to pray for me." He said, "Okay, why?" He's like, "I wrote a message that I'm not surely confident that I can really do." Now, some of you might think, "Well, Pastor, did you get enough time to study this week?" I know it was a busy week, right? Tuesday we had a funeral for Ryan's grandfather. Wednesday we had church. Thursday and Friday we're left in prep not only for Sunday but also for Bruce's funeral on Saturday. And so I'm going to be completely honest with you this morning. I'm about wrung. I am done. I just feel like a sponge that just has no more left to give. And so I told Lee as much. I said, "Buddy, I am here," which essentially is at the end of my week. See, Sunday is not necessarily for me. It's not the first day of the week for me. It's the last day. My week is always moving towards Sunday. And so I come to my Sunday today pretty much empty. And here I am, now tasked with trying to explain what it means when God says that He's timeless. So here's what I'm asking right at the beginning. You got to pray for your pastor today. Can you do that? Give me a good hearty amen. Pray for me as I get through this, because I really want us to be able to grasp, at the very least, what I've been able to understand about God's timelessness. God is timeless. And why do I struggle to explain timelessness? Well, it'd be this kind of like how a blind person, try to explain to a blind person the color blue. Been blind all of his life. How are you going to be able to explain to a blind person the color blue? And if you understand at least the problem that is, it's actually a little bit more complicated. It's really like if a blind person was trying to explain to another blind person what sight is. This is what I'm tasked with today. This is why we must come today with great humility, because honestly, we cannot fully comprehend what it means when God says that He is eternal, immortal, and unbound by time. It is hard, really, for us to truly grasp. I'm telling you this right up the front. Because if you leave today a little bit confused, that's exactly where you're supposed to be. Listen, let's be honest. Who Who would want to believe or serve a God that Pastor Ben could fully explain? Not me, believe me. We are beings of time, meaning we exist in time. Let's see, it's 11, 12, 45, 46, 47, 48 seconds, right? So today is March 6th, okay? And I am 35 years old, 3 weeks, 3 days, 11 hours, 12 minutes, 56, 57, 58, 59, 13 minutes old today. To a certain extent, I define myself, that is my actions, my schedule, my routine, using some sort of timetable. How many of you today set an alarm to get up? How many of you just naturally get up? How many of you are weird like that? Weirdos? Most normal people have to set an alarm to get up. Okay, all right, maybe this should be a better question. How many of you looked at the clock today? Okay, there we go. Awesome. All of us at some point, to some extent, we define ourselves by time. So concepts like eternity, forever, and time without end, they are hard to grasp. In the same way that a fish cannot understand what it is to be a bird, someone, that is us, who is inside the flow of time, cannot fathom their existence without being surrounded by the past, present, and future. Try this afternoon after lunch, after you guys have had something to eat. Do this, try to think of yourself without time. It's impossible. But is God like us? No. God is a Lord and the Lord of timelessness. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Literally, it's the first thing in the book. Do you want to know who God is? A good place to start typically is the beginning, right? So, how many of you like to read? How many of you hate to read? Okay, my wife has entered a new phase in her life where that's her out. She reads. How many books have you read this year, honey? Last month, she read 17 books. Yeah, Pastor Ben didn't read that many. But here's the thing. All of us know, at least to a certain, even if you read Green Eggs and Ham, which is my favorite, you got to start at the beginning of a book to understand who the characters are, right? They introduce you to, this weirdo who wants to eat green eggs and ham. Gross, or whatever book. You start at the beginning, right? Our book, the Bible, is really not that different. You start at the beginning and you're introduced to the main character of the book of the Bible, God. And we're told in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God what? Created the heavens and the earth. So this means we can reason that that God existed before there was a heaven and an earth. Have I broke everybody today? Before there was a beginning, there was God. Before the first rays of the sun shine bright in our solar system, there was God. Before the oceans wet the earth and the mountains pierced the sky, there was God. Before the first tree swayed in the wind and before the first flower bloomed, there was God. Before the first bird glided through the air, before the first deer darted through the field, before the first fish swam through the water, there was God. Before the first man sang the first songs of humanity, and before the first woman held her firstborn child, there was God. He was before every beginning. He was before the befores. The psalmist put it this way in Psalm 90. Lord, you have been our dwelling place in some generations. Good. All of them. Before the mountains were brought forth, or even you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Even though our God interacts with us in real time, God, what the Bible tells us about God, God reveals himself to us. We wouldn't know this about God unless he told us, this is how I am. And does God interact with us in real time? Absolutely. But that does not mean that God is a being of time. God stands outside time. God's edges are, as the psalmist says, from everlasting to everlasting. That is in every direction. That's what the psalmist meant. From everlasting to everlasting. He was saying, he's like, you want to know God's dimensions? Right? How many builders we have here today? You understand the terms width, height, right? What's the other one? Depth, thank you. You understand these concepts, right? And so, say you had a ruler that could measure God. The psalmist says, what you would read on the measuring stick would be from everlasting to everlasting. From this vanishing point to that vanishing point. Here's what I mean. When I say we are three-dimensional creatures, what do I mean? We live in 3 dimensions. But there is a thing called 2 dimensions. What are 2 dimensions? Flat drawings, right? Paintings are 2 dimensions. Hold on a second. So when I talk about dimensions, we all kind of understand the difference between 3 dimensions and 2 dimensions. But let's say just for a second that existence was 2-dimensional. It's not. Our existence is 3-dimensional. But let's say just for a second that existence, I hope that's flat. If it's not, I'm sorry for all my OCD people. I don't have a level. Is it like this? Good. At the very least, you'll stay awake because you're annoyed. Listen, I talked to my wife I was going to do this, and originally I was going to draw this, like with a marker, and she was like, don't do that. I know, everyone's like, oh, thank God for Pastor Ben's wife. Look, that would have been memorable, all right? But then it would be hard to paint over because they don't want to look at that line for the rest of it. Anyways, here's the point. Imagine this painter's tape is all of time, all of existence. There's a beginning, and there's an end. I don't know, say we're here. In fact, hold on a second. COVID, I guess, is almost over, right? But it really feels like COVID lasted 30 years. So let's make existence a little bit longer. So, here is all of time as if it appeared on a 2-dimensional plane. Follow me? God is the white. If you could, one of my favorite Disney movies in all time is Inside Out. It's the anthropomorphize emotions in the head of a teenage girl. That's a great, listen, Disney takes on some really interesting philosophical ideas, and they put it in such a way that it's palatable. But there's a great scene in Inside Out where these emotions become 2-dimensional. So imagine just for a second that rather than us being a 3-dimensional being, we're 2-dimensional, and you can put yourself here. And you wouldn't know that there is a 3rd dimension, is there? To you. To you, the world is what? Flat, 2-dimensional, and you can only look one way, back and forward. But yet God, what he tells us, that God cannot be contained, he does not change, he is immortal, he is timeless, he is boundless. So that means he exists outside of existence. He is everything If you were to ask someone on the two-dimensional plane, Billy, hey Billy, could you measure God? And he couldn't. He would have to say, as the psalmist does here, our God is from everlasting, from everlasting. As far as I can look this way, there's God. As far as I can look this way, there is God. But here's the thing. You ready? I'm going to break everyone. Ready? We're talking as a three-dimensional person looking at a two-dimensional picture. God doesn't live in any dimension. So when I talk about God's timelessness, this is what I mean. Whatever existence God has, He always is. When God created the world, He was the same God there when He met Abraham, when He met Moses, when He came as Jesus Christ, and when He came and saved my heart when I was 7 years old. The same God that Abraham met, I got to meet. He just always is. The biggest proof of God's timelessness, should I take this down? Or is it like kind of wompy? Okay. The biggest clue we get to God's timelessness is actually found in the story of Moses. Moses is keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to Moses in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. Usually when something goes poof on fire, guess what happens to that thing? Guess what happens to me all the time if I leave the bacon too long in the oven or on the skillet? It burns and it does catch on fire, and then the smoke alarms lose it. Right? There's fire! Get out of the house. So typically, when things are on fire, they are consumed. But this is a special bush. Moses looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. There was no smoke. Didn't look like it was crackling. You know, when you throw something in the fire, it crackles, and you start to see it break down. Not this bush. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight. Why the bush is not burned? Look, the guy was a shepherd. He lived a pretty boring life. And so he just happened to go look over here and see, look at that bush, it's on fire, which for him wouldn't have been unusual. What was unusual was, man, I've seen this before, but that bush is still a bush. I got to see this, right? And so Moses leaves his sheep. He's like, this is entertaining. He comes, he's looking at the bush, and all of a sudden, the bush not only is not consumed, it starts talking to him. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to Moses out of the bush, Moses, Moses. Can you imagine? Right? It was so funny. I was talking with Jeannie just literally as we were coming in. Talking to Jeannie, I was talking about Disney and Macy and Dave. They go to Disney, and so we're talking literally about Macy and Dave without Macy and Dave in the room. And all of a sudden I say, yeah, we need to talk to Macy. And Macy's like, hello, here I am. What are you saying about me, Pastor Ben? It was quite shocking for me. I was like, oh, what did I just say? Okay, I'm going to go back through. Hopefully no one's offended. Okay, great. We're safe. Moses literally hears his own name out of a fiery bush that's not consumed. Talk about being a little shocked. And Moses said, here I am. And God said to Moses, that is, do not come near, take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, and he was afraid to look at God. Do Do you see how God introduces himself? Moses, I already know you, but you don't know me just yet. The same God that your father served, that was me. The same God that Abraham served, that was me. The same God that Isaac and Jacob served. Hello, nice to meet you, Moses. They go back and forth, and God commissions Moses to go to Egypt to lead the Israelites free from Egypt. You all know that story with the plagues. Let my people go, whatever. And Moses is a little bit intimidated. He's got, believe it or not, he stutters. He's got a speech impediment. And he's like, what am I going to say? When they ask me what God I have come, under whose name, like, who has commissioned me, what am I going to tell them? God tells them. Then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to him? To them. God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Do you want to know technically what God's name is? God's name technically is I am who I am. But we can't say that, can we? What do we say? He is the I am. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my what? Name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. God created the world. God called Abraham out of Ur of Chaldees. He said, I'm going to make you a great name. And he had children, Isaac, Jacob. And then a lot of years pass, and there's Moses. Who should I say has sent me? And God says, the same one who called Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has sent you to them to set you free. Moses says, what's your name? I am. I am. Buckle up. Ready? The name I am is confusing. Shocker for me to say that on a Sunday morning. But it is. In fact, there are several ways that we can understand God's name, but the easiest, and when I say easiest, it's really not that easy. So is everyone paying attention today? I say this is the easiest way to understand God's name, but it's not easy. I think the easiest way to understand God's name is to use grammar. In the English language, we have 3 verb tenses. I was, I am, and I will be. As I said before, I'm exhausted today. And I was sleeping this morning soundly until my alarm rudely woke me up. I am here right now with you, present and accounted for. Hello. But I will be asleep again this afternoon for my Sunday afternoon nap. We all understand this idea of verb tenses. I can speak of myself in 3 ways: past, present, and future. However, the consequences of this is that whichever tense I use, I will be referring to a different Ben. The Ben of yesterday is distinctive from the Ben of today because it's not yesterday anymore. Which is also dissimilar or different from the Ben of tomorrow. I will be a different Ben tomorrow because it's tomorrow. I got some sleep, hopefully uninterrupted from my kids, and I will be a much better state mentally. I will be a much different Ben tomorrow than I am today. We are dynamic, changing creatures, and we change relative to the flow of time, don't we? For any of my older folks in here, are you as strong as you were in your 20s? Just a little. Are you as fit as you were in your 20s? Okay, we are dynamic creatures who change with the flow of time. But let me hearken us back to the first week of our study. Does God change? God is immutable. God does not change. And so the only proper way we can refer to God is not in the past tense, not in the future tense, but in the present tense. His very name, I am, defies us to put him in the past or the future. It says, try it. It doesn't make sense. Our God has no real beginning or no ending. You can see it in his very name. God lives. He exists in what people who study such things, they call it the eternal now. Is there ever a point in our illustration here where God did not exist? No. And since God knows everything from beginning to end, stands to reason that he must exist in a state or in an existence where he can see everything from beginning to end. And so the only way that, doesn't matter whether Abraham is talking to him, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, the children of Israel, or we talk of God, we talk of Jesus always in the present tense. Now, we may talk about what God has done in our life. That is true. And we may talk of what God will do in our life. But every time you do that, you're really not talking about God. God is always in the present. Always. Now, while I know this sounds something very hard to grasp, we actually already know this. You're like, okay, Pastor, I've been trying to follow you, but I have no idea. You're saying I already know what you're talking about. In the past, it's easy to measure, isn't it? We can open up a history book. How many of you have a Facebook account and you get reminded of stupid things you said 10 years ago? Right? Or pictures. You thought you were so cool, right? Facebook memories. We can look at our past and we can say that is the past. Likewise, while not as knowable as the past, we can actually determine somewhat of the future because of calendars. Unless Jesus comes back, Thursday's going to happen. And I know when Thursday will happen. Guess when Thursday happens? Yeah. Guess when Thursday ends? Great. Wow, you guys know your calendars. You know the weeks. So we can know the past, and we can know, to a certain extent, the future. In the same way, we can actually know our present. Follow me here. Not because we can look to some history book or date in the calendar, but because we can look up and see in real time when the present is. Hey, church, we already talked about the past, already talked about the future. Someone tell me, when is the present? Great. When? Yeah. How about now? How about now? Now is now. Now is gone. Now is now. Now, we cannot, in the traditional sense, measure the present. Can you measure the present? I mean, my clock says 11:36, right? And 12 seconds, 13 seconds. But the moment I look at it, it becomes the what? But yet we all know, are we really living in the past right now? No, this is the now. We are living in the present tense all the time. Technically speaking, it's impossible to measure precisely when the present is. Yet all of us know instinctively when it is happening. It is happening right now. And this, my dear friends, is how God experiences time. In the eternal now. As easily as we perceive now. Follow me. As easily as we perceive now, God perceives all of time. We may say he was, or we may say he will be, and from our perspective, that is true enough. But from God's perspective, he just always is. He is in the everlasting present. This is why in John 8:58, for those of you who are with us on Wednesday, we actually just studied this. And so if you want to know more about John 8:58, I encourage you to go on our website and just watch the latest John study on Wednesday. But we were right here. I was talking with Bob about this. We were in the car going for Bruce's burial. And then we were just, as we prone to do, Bob and I were talking about, he's like, what are you going to talk about Sunday? And I'm telling him about this whole thing. I was like, dude, you got to pray for me. How am I supposed to explain timelessness? And he's like, I don't know. I'm glad you're getting paid to do it. You know, it's just. But here's what we talked about. He's like, I'm going to talk about God's name, the I am. And he's like, man, isn't it amazing we just studied John 8? And I was like, we did, didn't we? I was so tired yesterday. I didn't even make this connection until Bob said it to me in the car. We literally were in John 8. In John 8:58, Jesus says, truly, truly, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. John 8, I wish I could go into John 8 right now, but I'm not going to turn Sunday morning into a John 8 study. But John 8, I know, poor Kay was like, look, if that happens, we're going to be here for 17 weeks. So it's taken us some time to get through John 8. But John 8 is all about Christ's identity. They want to argue about who Jesus' father was, and Jesus says, look, I know who my dad is. Your dad is the devil. And they get upset. And finally, they say, Abraham, in the flow of time, Jesus says, Abraham, look to my day, Jesus' day, and he was happy. He speaks of Abraham in the present tense. He was happy. And the people listening in the auditorium was like, hold on, you're not even 50. And you say you've met Abraham in person? And Jesus is like, yeah, actually, I not only met Abraham in person, before he was, I am. And they get upset. Does anyone know how that story ends, John 8? They start to throw stones at him. Try to kill him. Because Jesus was trying to say, listen, I'm God in the flesh, y'all. Nice to meet you. My name's Jesus. I already know your names. But amazingly, John, the gospel writer of John, heard Jesus say that in John 8, but he also heard that very same Jesus say another I am statement. Here we finally come to Revelation chapter 22. John the Revelator, the same one who wrote the book of John, who heard Jesus say in the temple, before Abraham was, I am, also had this crazy experience where he saw the future. And not just the future, John saw how time ends. And at the end of the age, John, the same one who was there to hear Jesus say, before Abraham was, I am, hears Jesus say, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Like some grand cartographer, God draws the borderlines. What's a cartographer? A cartographer makes maps, typically of a continent, right? And has God drawn the edges of countries, continents, and even galaxies? Yes! Yes! There's a great story in Job 38, I think. Job 28 or 38. And God looks at Job, were you there when I told the waters of the ocean to go this far and no further? Job's like, Job, were you there when I carved the valleys and the mountains? And Job says, God was there in the beginning, here in the present, and is always in our forever future, whatever that may be. This is why God says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last. God has drawn the edges of not only countries, continents, and galaxies, but our God has drawn the borderlines of time itself. Reality is like an ant scurrying across the trunk of some massive redwood. And God is not only the sky above, giving that tree space enough to grow, but He is also the ground below, anchoring that tree fast. Our God begins beginnings. Our God ends endings. He sets the last stone as easily as He has set the first stone. There never was a time when God wasn't, nor will there ever be. He just always is. This is what we mean when we say we know who holds tomorrow. As vast as existence may seem, it is but a speck in the palm of our timeless God. God holds the past, the present, and the future in His hand. He's the white. So what's the takeaway? Whew. You guys did great today. What's the takeaway? God's timelessness means we should not waste the time we have been given. Sharon, I hope it's okay with me to talk about Bruce again. Can I do that? Again, a great observation from Pastor Bob. Really glad we hired him. He's got some pretty good insight. We were headed to the burial for Bruce yesterday. And I just made the comment about how interesting it was, how everyone had a Bruce story, but it seemed always to be consistent with who the man was. And now, for those of you who were here, not here yesterday, there was just so many people here. And we had, let me say for one, just real quick, my church, and I know not everyone could come, so don't take this as a condemnation for those who couldn't be there. But for those of you who were able to come and you came, thank you. That you honored a good man yesterday. That meant the world to this pastor. And so our people told stories. Patrick and Lee told a story. And even Bob, another Bob, over here. I see you back there. He's working on security. I've never heard this man speak in his entire life. You can't see him. He's through the door. But even he got up and told a story. Bruce had a Bruce story. And then his family was here. Sharon and Donna and some of the others who were from Georgia. And they had Bruce stories. But here's the thing Bob pointed out to me. There were strangers who were there yesterday. I don't know who they were. The family didn't know who they were. People in our church didn't know who they were. But they knew Bruce. And his neighbors came. And one of them told a story about how Bruce raked the leaves before they moved in. Here's what Bob says to me. Isn't it encouraging that no matter what side of Bruce you got on, whether you knew him here at church or as a family or even as a neighbor, he was just Bruce. He was consistent. And there were people there yesterday, here, who had an impact because of Bruce's life on them. And we know, was Bruce a perfect man? No. But Bruce knew Jesus. Bruce took the time that was given to him, and he did not waste it. The psalmist goes on in Psalm 90. He talks of God. He says, "You return man to dust and say, 'Return, O children of man.'" Stop for just a second. We're going to get to the resurrection here in a couple weeks because it's going to be Easter. But listen, just because Bruce is dead doesn't mean we're not going to see him again. Right? God looks at dust and says, "Return, resurrect, O man." But the psalmist goes on, verse 4, "For 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night. You sweep them," that is the years. "You sweep the years away as a flood. They are like a dream." How many of you have had an amazing dream you wish you could remember? You woke up and it was like, what was that? You know? But it's like, how hard is it to really recall dreams? We can recall bad dreams, right? For some reason, we can remember nightmares pretty well. But good dreams are very fleeting. You can't hold on to them. And here, the psalmist says that years are like dreams to God. They pass away. Like grass that is renewed in the morning, and in the morning it flourishes and renews, but in the evening, that same grass, it fades and withers. This is how years are to God. They're like grass that grows up in a day and is destroyed in a day. And the conclusion that this psalmist comes to is this. So because time is fleeting, it is here 1 minute and gone the next. Bruce was here 1 minute, then gone the next. Because time is fleeting, the psalmist says, "Dear God, teach me to number my days that we may get a heart of wisdom." Teenagers, particularly, are pretty dumb for one reason. It's because they think they will live forever. And they will make the stupidest choices because they think they will live forever. And the only reason why all of us know that is because we were all teenagers. And we all made some stupid decisions because we were like, we're young! Woo! Do whatever we want. But wisdom knows, are we going to live forever? No. Time is finite on this earth. As Dennis just said, you are going to live forever somewhere, and if you know Jesus Christ, you'll live forever in eternity, but if you don't know Jesus Christ, you're going to live eternity in hell. But the point is that this life, not the second life, but this life is finite. If the times of days are numbered, so too are the times of our life numbered. Just as we have all had a beginning, we will all of us also have an ending. I preached 2 funerals this week. And I am reminded, more than I ever have been, especially in light of my own grandfather's passing. 2022 so far has been a year of death for me. And if there's one thing that I am reminded of most is that this life is not forever. We will all of us, just like we all of us have had a beginning, we will all of us have an ending. No one lives forever in this life, and so we ought to take what time is given to us to serve the timeless God. In doing so, you will engage in a life that outlives you. One day, God will take all of existence and we'll roll it up like a scroll. And start over. And whether or not you're on that second new earth, that second new eternity, will determine about whether or not you know Jesus Christ. And whether or not you know that your numbers are fleeting. And so whatever life God has given you right now, you're going to do as much as you can for Him. Because here's what Jesus says. Do not lay up yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust does destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves what? Treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Don't put your heart in an existence that someday is going to be rolled up and throw it away to make room for something new. Put your life into a work that will outlive your time. We only have so much time to give. Only what time you give Christ will outlive you. Our gracious Heavenly Father, I come before you today, Father, speaking to a God who, while interacts with us in the flow of time, you stand outside of time. God, you know how this sermon was going to go today before I ever wrote it. You know what tomorrow is going to bring for us. You know our past. You know the past that is the past. You know the befores there was a before. You're going to know, you know the afters after the afters. God, you are a God who stands apart completely from us. Yet God, you give us 70 years, 80 years, 90 years to live for you. God, I want to take my whatever I have left and use it for you, like Bruce did. I want to take my life so that while, God, I didn't really start very well, I would really like to end well. I love you, my Jesus. Help us, Lord, to grapple, Father, with the fact that you are a God of timelessness, that you know our beginnings, our middles, and our endings, and that, God, for some reason, though you know the full span of our stories, you still chose to love us. Thank you, my Jesus. I ask all this according to your will and for your sake alone. Amen. Hey, church, I love you. I'm going to be over here. If you want to talk with me, I want to talk with you. Don't forget today, we do have the fellowship for Joe and Bonnie. Just go ahead and make yourself over there. Heavenly Father, thank you for the food. Blessed, nourishment our body. Amen. The food is blessed, so just help yourself. But before you do, sign. Make sure you sign this picture over here. Yeah, spring forward. But God bless you. I'm going to be over here. If you want to talk with me, I want to talk with you. God bless you. You're dismissed.